All right, first off, how many people here have put in at least one pit in the SnowPilot? Most of the room. Thank you, because that adds to the database, and I'm going to talk about what's going on with the database here and how we can use some of this information. So first off, this whole project started in 2003 because Carl was trying to do some research on shear quality. And in order to do his research, he went around to everyone he knew who had dug pits and said, hey, here's an Excel spreadsheet. I want you to go into your pit books over the last 3 or 4 years and enter in everything from the height of the layer, the weak layer, the hardness, and you had to do all this manually. And I was like, this is a joke. Like, this is really how science gets done? This, you know, it relied so much on just who Carl knew and who was willing to do this over the summer. And so it just spurred this idea that maybe there'd be a way we could all database some of this. And so we created SnowPilot in 2004. In 2007, we actually created software so a PC could be used, because the very first iteration used this here, which is the precursor to a smartphone called the Palm Pilot. And this was what you use to put all your contacts in, and you know, we actually started entering data using a Palm Pilot. So in 2007, we created a software package, and then in 2016, we really upgraded and made a website. So in 2012, the database, the whole SnowPilot database, had 5,400 snow pits in it. By 2016, it had gone up to 7,200. 2018, we doubled it to 14,000. The reason we doubled it is because we have it online now and it's easy for people to use. Out of these 14,000 snow pits, it represents over 106,000 layers and about 36,000 stability tests. So it's a huge data set that we're able to, and it's growing, you know, by leaps and bounds. We are adding about 30 to 50 snow pits a day from around the world. You know, currently in the SnowPilot database. That's pretty cool. So thank you for being part of that effort. Now, there's 2 ways to enter your data. The first, which a lot of you are familiar with, this is the software version. This was the original version in 2007 that we came up with, where you enter it all in here and then you push it to the web, and then we capture it. We're still getting about 400, I think last year we had 470 snow pits that came this way. This is used in areas where you don't have an internet connection. So if you are just gonna make this somewhere, you can still enter your data, and then when you get a chance, you can upload it to the database. By far the more popular way now is our website, snowpilot.org. If you are introducing someone to SnowPilot and they're gonna sign up, it's worthwhile for them to take this tiny little, 10-minute tutorial to show you how to actually enter the data. And now I'm just going to go over a few, since you've all used it, and we have people in this room that are kind of admins of ski patrols, of guide services. There's a few things to be aware of and some changes that have happened. First off, you can have up to 3 affiliations now. So if you work for Big Sky Ski Area in the winter, then you go to New Zealand and you're working for another ski area there, you can choose which organization you're actually digging this pit for. The org admin groups, you choose a group, and when you're an org admin, like I know Chelan and Mike are org admins at Big Sky, they get to see everything. They get to look inside and make sure that they're getting the pits that they need and that they're, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And then down here is really important. This is the default visibility of your pits, because when you make a snow pit, it goes into the database. That's what will happen. It goes in, we get to use it for research. Now, you might not want the public to see it, and so you'll get some choices there, and your choices are to either have it publicly visible only by my group, or visible only by me. And then you'll set that default, and that carries forward. It doesn't really matter to me what you choose, because it's in the database. That's all I really care about. But just be aware that this is where you set that, is right here in your default. When you start SnowPilot, an error we sometimes see is people do not set their preferences before they start making a snow pit. And you have to set your preferences first so it knows whether you want 0 at the top, 0 at the bottom, using a linear scale, logarithmic scale. So you do all this right here on your preferences page. And then if you're an org admin, you're an organization administrator, you get this little dashboard here. This is my dashboard, and it shows everyone in my group that can add pits. I can remove someone if I want. This down here allows me to share my pits with other groups. So even though my pits will say are visible only to my group, same as ski area, I'm like, I only want us to look at it. But the ski area next door, they might be interested in my data. I can share it with that group. So individual groups can share their pits with each other. So you can, you can share. It's pretty cool. When you make a snow pit, that pit is yours. It's attached to you. It's attached to your username. And it will live forever in the database. If you delete SnowPilot, you say SnowPilot sucks, I'm never using it again, you get rid of your account, we still get your pits. They're in there. Now, if you're working for Chelan at Big Sky, and you do a few seasons of pits, and you've got your 30 pits in there, and then you go, I'm gonna move, I'm going to Tom, I'm gonna move over to Yellowstone Club here. He still gets to see those original 30 pits, because they're tagged to Big Sky. Now when the new patrollers with Tom and they're making their pits at Yellowstone Club, well, only Tom gets to, that group gets to see those. So that's how you can move around. You still get to keep your pits. They're still in the database. But when someone moves, you as an organization don't lose that data. So you still have those records. All the data is backed up on 2 separate servers, one in California, one in here in Montana. So we've got some redundancy built in because it's a lot of data we're kind of holding on to. We need as much information as possible, and you'll see why when we look at some of this data, but it is really important that we fill out things like, is this a practice pit? Meaning, I'm just messing around. I just signed up, I'm just gonna make some fake pit just so I can practice. We want that checked so it doesn't get dumped into the database with the real pits. Same thing with, was this dug in a ski area? This is also important because a lot of times certain research, we might not want pits that came from a ski area, or we might decide to look only at pits at ski areas. So this allows us to kind of filter and parse that out. Things like the lat long, all these other pieces of core information, I really encourage you to fill them out even if you personally don't need it for that day. You're like, the temperature, who cares, It's like, it might not matter to you, but since you're out there anyway, and if you have the means, you might as well put it in because it does matter to us when we start doing research. So the more information we get, the better. It's really good to have the lat long. You can just click a spot on the map here and it'll fill it in, and because we can use that as well.
About that, I've noticed if you drop a pin, it'll autofill your lat long.
Yes.
It doesn't autofill your elevation or aspect. I can imagine why it wouldn't do the slope angle, but it seems like it wouldn't be too much harder to have a auto-filled elevation or aspect for you. Is that something that you're aware of or can do?
No, never even thought of it, so
Okay.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Like, just
it's a great idea.
easier.
Something here, this is where you enter in your layers page, and down here, which you might not be aware of, is you can very quickly flip the axis of your pit, which comes in handy later in the season when you've been doing 0 at the ground. Now all of a sudden you're heading off to Cook City, there's 300 centimeters on the ground and you want to quick flip it where you want 0 at the surface. You can do that really quickly right there. That confuses some people. Obviously, this is a pit. This is what gets generated on the front end. This is what you look at. This is what the database gets. So we've got 14,000 of these, in the database. One layer, just one layer. If you filled out every field in that layer, there'd be 27 columns per layer. multiple hardnesses, multiple grain types, stability tests, problematic layers, all the fields could be like 27 columns long. So we get a lot of data that we can work with from just, from a pit, especially just one layer. So we decided, last month was like, hey, let's just pick some low-hanging fruit for this database and see what we get, see what's out there. And so a question that we've talked about over the years is about average slope angle of pits before September 2011 compared to after September 2011. Why that data is important is because at the ISSW before this, Carl did some research showing that with a compression test, it didn't matter if you were on a steep slope or a shallow slope. The score didn't matter. It was going to be the same, which was, in my mind, pretty groundbreaking because it meant I didn't have to go on the steep slopes to do my stability tests. And so in September 2011, in the Avalanche Review, Carl wrote a paper about this. And so that was kind of a marker of the before and after, when we started to learn about we don't have to go on to steep slopes. So is there a difference between before and after he did this research? The answer is yes. And so we looked at before 2011 there, we had 3,100 pits, average slope angle was 31.6 degrees. Now, we were only looking at backcountry pits, and then after looking at 7,400 pits, the angle dropped to 26.9, which is a difference of 4.7 degrees. So that's significant. And so we know that our behavior as a population has definitely changed, where we're not necessarily going out onto steep slopes as often. Carl made this box plot showing the difference there. And Carl, you can correct me here, but you were saying that because the data set was so large, the difference was very statistically significant.
Yeah, very statistically significant. The small squares are the medians, the larger squares are the inner 50% of the data, and then the whiskers are the outliers. And so you look at it, and it doesn't look like it's that big a difference, but for this big a data set, that difference is very highly statistically significant.
Doug, you guys used to dig on 70-degree slopes?
It's like when you ski as hard as I do. That's usually climbing up. Yeah, with ice tools. The other question, a really easy question we asked it is, hey, when we're looking at problematic layers, because one of the things that SnowPilot asks you is what's your problematic layer in the snow pit? What's your layer of most concern? We looked at all snow pits in the western US, not at ski areas that weren't tests. And so here, what's interesting here, and it just constantly amazes me, is here we have this data set of 14,000 snow pits. But then as soon as we start filtering, we say, okay, we only want the backcountry pits. So it's like, oh, now we are down to 7,000. Oh, now we're just looking at Western United States. Oh, now we're down to like 6,000. Then you say, oh, now we want the ones with problematic layers. Oh, now we lost another few thousand there. So even though the data set is huge, as soon as we start asking it questions, it just starts getting a little smaller and a little smaller and a little smaller. And that's why it's really important for us to keep putting our data into this, because we want larger numbers when we start assessing this. So I was asking, what are the top snow grain types for problematic layers in the western US? I was just really curious, like, what is it? So we looked at the top 6, and what they are, the number 1 is faceted snow, coming in at 30% of everything. No huge surprise there, but this is for all of the western US. Second was rounding facets at 11%. Oh, this obviously isn't in order. I'll just fill these in. Third was depth hoar. You can see a big difference though in the numbers. We're going from 8%, compared to number 1 was 29. Near surface facets, then surface hoar, and then some decomposing precip particles. Then the next question was, well, this clearly is different regionally. So when we look at the different snow climates, when we broke it up, we're looking at the coastal, intercontinental, and continental snowpacks. We see that there is some differences here. In the coastal, we can see that nothing isn't terribly dominant. These two at 17% and 15% here, just some facets. Versus intercontinental, the number one is by far facets over here. And then when we're looking at Colorado, between depth hoar and facets, it compromises almost 50% of that layer. There is, some interpretation here, like what you might call a rounded facet, I might call a facet, or vice versa. But this just gives a general idea as to what some of the differences are. Now, what I thought was interesting is that when we teach, especially like at National Avalanche School or some advanced classes, we meaning instructors, spend a lot of time talking about depth hoar. It's easy to talk about, it's easy to see, a lot of us experience it, but really, it makes sense if you're in Colorado, a little bit if you're here in Intercontinental, but if you're mostly coastal, it's probably not something you're going to see. It seems like we should spend more time as instructors talking about faceted grains. And even though the process is sort of similar, it's not really. I mean, it's more complicated. And so to spend maybe more time talking about how does near surface faceting occur? What are the different types? And really understanding that is going to be more important than maybe what we're spending our time on now. I mean, just something to think about. And then Coop at the CAIC, the Colorado Avalanche Information Center, is experimenting with, he's taking the SnowPilot data as it comes in, and then he's putting it onto a map, GIS map. And this touches with what Ben was talking about, what he's doing with observations. And so next season, we'll have one here for Montana. All public pits will get populated onto a map, and you can click on one of those dots, and the pit's gonna pop up. And there's also gonna be, over on the side, a little area where you can filter. And so right now, he's got a few different colors, and what he was playing around with is saying, well, if the problematic layer is 1 meter or more deep, he was giving it a green color. If the problematic layer is less than that, he was giving it a red. And so that was he's just test driving, what are some things we can look at. So it's pretty exciting to think that we might be able to use this data to visually represent some things we're concerned about. Because maybe we might become concerned with deep layers, and we just might want to look and be able to highlight some of the pits that are showing us some of these deep layers so we can look at them. So this is kind of the future where it's moving. I'm really excited because this is just a cool way to look at the data. We've been collecting this data now for 11, it's hard math here. Yeah, a long time. And it's really good to see it being used. So that's all I've got. I really use it. If you have questions Chelan's suggestions, great suggestion. We take them all, we look at them, we keep making changes on the fly all the time. It matters, and we're doing research with it. So thank you.